My name is Caroline Keats and I am the Managing Director and CEO of ENRG Elements. ENRG Elements is an ASX listed African-focused exploration company. We have uranium assets in the uranium-rich Tim Mersoï Basin in Niger, and we have copper assets in the emerging world-class Kalahari Copper Belt in Botswana. We're a company that's focused on a clean energy future and being part of it. And today, as part of my Clean Talk series, I'm speaking with James Eggins, our non-executive chairman, about uranium and the nuclear space. James has a long history of working in the sector, and I've really benefited from his wisdom over the time that I've known him. James has worked in the uranium industry for over 40 years, working with large and small uranium producers in Australia and Africa, as well as uranium development companies. In the various roles, he's dealt with most of the major uranium buyers, and he has extensive experience in uranium marketing and logistics. So I'm very pleased to have him here today. James, in your experience, where is the nuclear power industry today, and what do you see for it in the future?
Hi, Caroline. Thanks for the introduction. When I joined the industry, the New Exco exchange value, which was the spot price indicator at the time, had moved from around $6 a pound to a high of around 42, before beginning a decline back down to the $6 level in the 1990s. So from that perspective, today's price around $56 a pound is nothing very exciting. But behind those historic price moves, I think there is now considerable ground for optimism. The worldwide trend away from fossil fueled electricity generation, based on some very heroic assumptions about the capability of renewables to fill the gap, is exposing a growing proportion of the public to the real challenges of producing clean, reliable, secure and affordable electricity. Power costs are rising, even though renewables are presented as cheap. Meanwhile, in the background, nuclear power stations demonstrate day in and day out their ability to operate at high capacity, producing reliable, clean power. Nuclear's held its share of global electricity production around 10% for many years, and I think the historic antipathy to all things nuclear is clearly changing in many countries.
Yeah.
Added to that, events in Ukraine have emphasised the importance of secure energy supplies and revived the old strategies of countries which have nuclear power, tending to look at it as a secure indigenous system, even though the fuel cycle is heavily dependent on international trade. So I really see a sincere and real likelihood of a recommitment to nuclear power over the next decade as part of the energy transition, and as a result of the increasing priority on reliability and affordability of electricity production.
I couldn't agree with you more. You've also mentioned the nuclear fuel cycle. Can you explain to our viewers a little bit more about the fuel cycle and the implications of growth in the nuclear power sector?
We've got a graphic of the nuclear fuel cycle on the screen.
Yep.
In a sense, the nuclear fuel cycle is actually the nuclear supply chain. Nuclear power is complex and sophisticated, and it's international in the sense that many nuclear countries do not possess their own conversion and enrichment plants. So uranium does not move directly from a mine to a reactor. For most light water reactors, the uranium passes through several discrete stages of processing, often done in foreign countries, each of which involve costs and logistics, and each of which has to have the capacity to provide services for the end user, the reactor operator. This also means that there are long lead times between uranium procurement and ultimate uranium consumption. So what this means is, as the nuclear power industry grows around the world, we'll not only need more uranium, but we'll need more conversion and enrichment. So it's important that all elements of the fuel cycle grow in sync to enable the whole industry to grow. Traditionally, most nuclear power operators contract for each stage of the fuel cycle separately. So often natural uranium requirements are determined after fuel design and enrichment commitments have been made.
We know the nuclear fuel cycle often involves nuclear countries contracting with foreign suppliers for certain fuel cycle components. But what risks does this hold?
Well, historically, there was very little risk. For the last 50 years, the international fuel cycle has worked very, very efficiently and has demonstrated strength and reliability. But I think it's also brought about a bit of complacency. So, for example, Russia now is now a significant supplier of enrichment services to the world market, and may in fact have as much as 14% of the US enrichment market. Kazakhstan is now the dominant natural uranium producer. Other countries still have arbitrary restrictions on uranium production. So these sort of aspects of the fuel cycle have geopolitical significance, and they've got to be considered in the nuclear expansion scenario.
Okay, so what happens when the world recommits to large-scale nuclear power? That's either using existing technology or small modular reactors, which are getting a lot of traction in the market these days. What do you think would be the impact of that as we move forward and go down this path?
Yeah, Caroline, I think SMR technology is very, very interesting. It might offer a very cost-effective way for incremental nuclear expansion in existing plants, or as a nuclear entry point for greenfield installations in countries which are currently non-nuclear. So that's a very positive development for the industry. If we look at natural uranium, the aspect that we're particularly interested in the fuel cycle, natural uranium is necessary but not sufficient. New supplies require very long lead times and significant pre-production and pre-sales investment. So at the moment, the world has got 392 gigawatts of nuclear capacity, with another 66 gigawatts under construction. The uranium requirements for this at the moment is about 63,000 tonnes on a uranium basis, and this should probably grow by another 40% over the next 10 years. So any significant commitment to more nuclear power is going to be on top of those numbers. But the missing point is that last year, uranium production was only around 49,000 tonnes. And in fact, Western world production has never matched annual requirements since 1984. So historically, this gap between uranium requirements and uranium production has been filled by inventories of various types and the downblending of military high enriched uranium, all of which have kept the industry running smoothly, but have interfered with the pricing signals necessary to encourage significant new uranium exploration and development. So while it's true there's plenty of uranium in the world, it's also true that a lot of new production is needed to fill the existing supply gap and to underwrite a significant expansion.
So, James, what do you think the role of those physical uranium trusts are having on the whole supply market? Because if we recognise that we're not producing enough to meet reactor requirements, the fact that groups like SPUT are taking significant amounts of supply from the market, how do you think that's going to impact pricing, and how do you think that's going to impact supply?
I think the building up of significant commercial inventories now in the hands of financial participants in the market is actually an indicator of an imminent shortage of uranium. Certainly that material is available there to fill in the gaps, but it won't be sufficient if we see a significant recommitment to nuclear power.
What, in your opinion, is necessary to ensure adequate uranium is available in the future?
Well, look, in my opinion, the simple answer is better pricing. In commodities, long-term prices follow costs, and in uranium, of course, the costs begin at exploration and continue through to ultimate production. So on that basis, a pure spot price mechanism probably doesn't recognise those costs until there is an imminent physical shortage, by which time it is often too late. So if you look at the pre-Fukushima price profile, you can see what can happen when there are feelings about an imminent shortage. Now, when I started in the industry, nearly all uranium transactions were concluded directly between utility and producers at negotiated long-term prices. Now, the world has changed, and market-based pricing for most commodities is now standard. In uranium, there are now well-financed intermediaries who provide supplies on market prices. And it's hard to see, but it's hard to see how this will be adequate for uranium if significantly more production is needed well ahead of actual consumption because of the long lead times. So I think we probably need to pivot back to longer term pricing for critical supplies and spot and mid-term pricing coexisting to manage short-term demand adjustments. Either way, I'm convinced that uranium prices will need to increase because the costs of production are relentlessly moving upwards, regardless of uranium grades and improvements in processing technology.
You've been in this sector for a long time and you've seen the various pricing cycles and you've seen the attitudes towards uranium, particularly off the back of events like Fukushima and 3 Mile Island. What do you think the sentiment towards uranium is today and how different is it from past attitudes?
Well, you left out the other big nuclear example, which was Chernobyl, which also had a very significant impact on public attitudes. Look, I'm optimistic that the younger generations view technology as a solution rather than a problem. And I think nuclear offers a fairly elegant technical solution to the problems of generating large quantities of electricity cleanly and reliably. I think also the actual track record of the nuclear industry, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, Fukushima notwithstanding, is excellent by any metric, and it's very hard to argue against that.
Well, I also hold that view. And so there seems to be a lot of excitement about the nuclear sector and the uranium market. Do you feel the same excitement?
Oh, absolutely. I think now we're looking at the best lineup of opportunities for another 50 years of growth in nuclear. As I explained before, the energy transition is educating the public a little bit more on the complexities and the importance of getting your energy system right. And I think that's where nuclear is ready to do it. It's existing technology. As I mentioned, the SMR might offer a cost-effective way of getting into this business for countries that aren't in it at the moment. The nuclear fuel cycle is very elegant. It manages its wastes very well. It's reasonably efficient in its energy generation and has a lot of appeal. And I think, notwithstanding people's reservations, we'll continue to see growth. I'm very optimistic about it.
Do you think there's going to be a change in the attitudes towards nuclear and nuclear power in Australia? Because in the past, it's been very, very different. But as we're now focusing on energy security and energy costs, and we've already seen reliability come into play, particularly on the East Coast, there seems to be a role for nuclear in Australia. What do you think?
Yes, I sincerely believe that there will be changes. I mean, during my career, Australia has been willfully blind about nuclear power, even though we have been historically a very large uranium producer. And I guess from an Australian point of view, we could afford to be willfully blind because we've got large energy resources. However, part of that energy resource is coal, that's going to be closed. Gas is required for other things. And so we'll soon be facing exactly the same energy challenges that other countries have. And nuclear is sitting there as an available alternative. And I think as people look at it again, they'll say exactly what was the problem we have with this. The other bit that we've got, of course, is that there is an inherent contradiction in the military planning for nuclear-powered submarines in a country that otherwise officially disdains all things nuclear. So I'm very optimistic that we will see changes in Australian policy as well.
Thank you so much, James. I really appreciate your time and all your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline.